This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a listener request about some of the key campaigns of World War II, those that involved both the United States and Canada.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, should be good.
Yeah.
We've got a ton of sources for this one. Historical accounts, personal narratives. We're ready for some surprises and to uncover some details you might not know about these pivotal events.
What I find so fascinating about this request is that it goes beyond just battles.
Oh, how so?
Well, we'll be looking at how all these campaigns were connected, exploring things like logistics, technology, and the human cost of the war.
Right. We'll be covering everything from the vast Battle of the Atlantic, where Canadian ships braved those U-boat attacks, all the way to the beaches of Normandy on D-Day.
Exactly. And you know what's often overlooked? That very first campaign, the Battle of the Atlantic, it wasn't just some warm-up for D-Day.
I see what you mean.
It was absolutely crucial for the Allies to even launch any of those later offensives.
Okay, well, let's dive right in then with the Battle of the Atlantic, spanning from 1941 to 1944. This wasn't just a skirmish. It was fought across the entire North Atlantic. We're talking an area bigger than all of North America combined. A battlefield stretching from New York to London.
Wow, that's huge.
And control of this massive expanse was vital. Like, the Allies needed to keep this lifeline open, a constant flow of everything. Troops, tanks, food, fuel, flowing from North America to Britain and even the Soviet Union.
Oh yeah, without those supplies, fighting Hitler would have been near impossible.
And the Axis powers, especially Germany, were determined to cut off that lifeline.
Yep.
They used their U-boats in coordinated wolf pack attacks.
Oh, I've heard of those.
They were super effective at sinking Allied ships.
Yeah, those first few years were really rough on the Allies. Heavy losses.
Definitely. But things changed in 1943.
Oh, what happened?
It was like the Allies suddenly got a whole new set of tools. And we're not just talking about bravery here. We're talking game-changing technology.
Sounds intriguing.
Like the Allies had made huge strides in radar and sonar,
Oh, wow.
which helped them detect those hidden U-boats.
Ah, that makes sense.
And then there's the breaking of the Enigma code.
Whoa, hold on, Enigma. That sounds like something straight out of a spy movie.
I know, right? But it was real, and it was a game changer.
I bet. But I'm guessing it wasn't just about reading the messages.
Exactly. They could actually use that intel to outmaneuver the Germans.
Like how?
Well, deciphering Enigma didn't just let them anticipate German movements. They could actually pinpoint those wolf packs.
Really?
Yeah. So they could reroute convoys and even send out hunter-killer groups to target them.
That's amazing.
But even with Enigma, it wasn't a sure thing.
How so?
It took this constant work from brilliant code breakers and analysts just to stay one step ahead of the Germans, who were, of course, always trying to change their codes.
So it was this constant cat-and-mouse game.
Pretty much, yeah. And we can't forget about the long-range aircraft patrols.
Right. Those were important, too.
They could cover vast areas of the Atlantic, forcing those U-boats to stay underwater, limiting their attack options.
It sounds like it was a multi-pronged approach that finally turned the tide.
It really was. So by mid-1944, thanks to this combo of technology, strategy, and pure grit, the Allies had basically won the Battle of the Atlantic.
Imagine the relief in Britain, that lifeline of supplies, no longer constantly under threat.
Yeah, arriving like clockwork. It's no wonder that large-scale operations like D-Day were even possible.
Definitely a major turning point.
Speaking of D-Day, and to go back to what you said earlier about overlooking the U.S. and Canada's contributions in the Battle of the Atlantic.
It's crucial to remember that this was a team effort.
For sure.
The U.S., even before officially entering the war, was aiding Britain and the Soviets through the Lend-Lease Act.
Oh yeah, that was a lifeline of crucial supplies.
And once they joined the fight, their navy became a crucial force.
Escorting those convoys and hunting U-boats.
Precisely. But what's truly remarkable is Canada's role.
I think people often underestimate them in World War II.
Their navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, went from a small force to the third largest navy in the world by the war's end.
Wow, I had no idea.
They escorted over 25,000 merchant ships across the Atlantic.
That's incredible. It really shows the scale of their involvement and the danger they faced.
Absolutely, a testament to their dedication.
This completely changes my view of Canada's role in the war.
It really highlights how intertwined the efforts of the Allied nations were.
Now, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Our listener also wanted to look at the Dieppe raid in 1942.
Yes, a lesser-known but incredibly important event,
A story of tragedy, but also valuable lessons learned.
often at a terrible cost, sadly.
So Dieppe, a port town in northern France, saw Allied forces, including many Canadians, launch this daring raid in August of 42.
What was the strategy behind it?
Well, there were a few goals at play.
Okay.
They wanted to test the feasibility of a large-scale landing on the French coast.
Makes sense. That coastline was heavily fortified.
They also needed to gather intel on the German defenses and try to cause some damage and disruption.
It was like a high-stakes recon mission.
Exactly. But unfortunately, it didn't go as planned. It rarely does in war.
The Germans were incredibly well prepared at Dieppe.
They were.
Yeah, Allied intelligence underestimated their strength and defenses.
Oh, no.
And sadly, the raid resulted in heavy casualties.
How bad?
Over 60% of the Allied force was either killed, wounded, or captured.
That's awful.
And of those casualties, almost 5,000 were Canadians.
That's a devastating loss.
It truly was, and the impact of this event is still felt in Canada today.
It's hard to imagine the grief.
It is, but even in this devastating setback, Dieppe provided those crucial, although painful, lessons for the Allies.
What kind of lessons?
Well, Dieppe showed them some critical flaws in amphibious tactics and communications.
I see.
It highlighted the need for much heavier pre-landing bombardment to soften those German defenses.
To make it easier for the ground troops.
Exactly. And it showed the need for better coordination between air, naval, and ground forces.
So Dieppe, a tactical defeat, but its lessons were applied to the planning of future operations.
Including D-Day 2 years later. It's a harsh truth of war that progress sometimes comes at a high price.
It's a stark reminder that even amidst tragedy, there can be valuable lessons learned. And the sacrifices at Dieppe, while deeply regrettable, did contribute to the Allied victory in Europe.
But the war was far from over.
Not even close. Just a few months after Dieppe, in November 1942, the Allies launched Operation Torch.
That was a major turning point, shifting the focus to North Africa.
And it was a sign of the U.S. military's growing power.
Absolutely. It was their first big offensive in the European theater, a real change in strategy.
Take us through Operation Torch. What were the goals in North Africa?
The main aim was to take control of North Africa back from the Axis powers.
They had a pretty strong presence there.
Oh,
Right?
yeah. German and Italian forces were threatening Allied shipping lanes in the Mediterranean.
I see.
And it was also a stepping stone toward a potential invasion of southern Europe.
Attacking the soft underbelly of Axis territory.
Exactly. And this wasn't just skirmishes. We're talking large-scale amphibious landings.
Where did these happen?
In Morocco and Algeria, hitting those strategic ports and airfields.
But wasn't that French territory?
It was, and there was some initial resistance from the French Vichy forces.
That must have been a tense situation.
You're telling me the Allies were basically invading French territory?
How did that play out?
Luckily, the resistance didn't last long.
That's good.
Many French commanders actually sympathized with the Allies and quickly surrendered.
Wow, that paved the way for a fast advance.
By May 1943, just 6 months after landing, the Axis forces were completely gone from North Africa.
A significant victory.
Yeah.
And this campaign really showed the growing strength of the U.S. military.
Absolutely. The U.S. Army, under General Eisenhower, was central to both the landings and the battles that followed.
This was Eisenhower's first major command, wasn't it?
It was, and he was already showing those leadership skills and strategic thinking that would make him supreme Allied commander later on.
So North Africa wasn't just a win, it was a proving ground for Eisenhower and the U.S. forces.
Precisely. They learned valuable lessons about logistics, combined arms operations, and coordinating a multinational force.
Lessons that would be vital in the larger campaigns to come.
It was a real crucible, forging the U.S. Army into a powerful force ready to tackle the liberation of Europe.
What about the Canadians? Were they involved in North Africa?
Their role in North Africa was mainly focused on air and naval support.
Okay.
But their experience in earlier campaigns, especially the Battle of the Atlantic, had sharpened their skills and prepared them for what was to come.
Right. They were becoming a crucial part of the Allied team.
Bringing valuable experience and unwavering commitment.
It's incredible to see how these seemingly separate campaigns, the Atlantic, Dieppe, and Torch, were all connected.
Each building on the lessons of the last.
Each victory and even defeat pushed the Allies closer to liberating Europe.
It's like a chain reaction.
But of course, the war was far from over.
No, with the Axis out of North Africa, the Allies set their sights on a much bigger target, Sicily.
That strategic island just off the toe of Italy?
Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, was even bigger than the North African landings.
And the stakes were incredibly high.
They were aiming to knock Italy out of the war and open up the Mediterranean for Allied shipping.
A pivotal moment for sure.
Absolutely. Operation Husky was a huge gamble.
It really was. But let's delve into that in part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
We'll explore the Sicilian campaign, the fall of Mussolini, and the Allied push toward the heart of Nazi-controlled Europe.
Can't wait.
We'll see you then.
See ya.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time, we covered a lot of ground, from the Battle of the Atlantic to that crucial victory in North Africa.
And now the Allied forces, after their success in North Africa, set their sights on a new target, Sicily.
That strategic island right off the toe of Italy.
Operation Husky, that was the invasion of Sicily. It was a massive undertaking, even bigger than those North African landings.
We're talking over 150,000 troops, thousands of ships.
A complex plan that required a ton of coordination between the air, naval, and ground forces.
And like we said before, the stakes were high.
Oh, yeah.
A successful invasion would not only open up the Mediterranean for Allied shipping,
Right.
but it could potentially knock Italy out of the war.
A huge blow to the Axis powers.
Imagine the pressure on those Allied commanders.
They were taking a big gamble, trying to exploit Italy's weaknesses while facing a determined enemy.
Dug in on fortified terrain, no less.
Exactly.
So walk us through this operation. When did Operation Husky kick off? What were those early stages of the invasion like?
The invasion started in July 1943.
Okay.
Allied forces landed at different points along the Sicilian coast.
I bet the fighting was intense right from the start.
It was. The Germans and Italians put up a fierce fight.
And the terrain itself must have been a challenge.
Oh, yeah. Those mountains and narrow valleys didn't make things easy.
I can only imagine the challenges for those troops landing on the beaches, enemy fire, unfamiliar territory.
It was a lot to deal with.
Were there any specific parts of the Sicilian campaign that really stood out, either as challenging or surprising?
One of the biggest challenges was the logistics. Supplying that massive invasion force, maintaining communications, and coordinating the troops and equipment was a huge task.
It's easy to overlook that side of things.
Yeah, it took a lot of ingenuity from those Allied logistical teams.
So it wasn't just about bravery on the front line.
No, it was a total team effort.
Countless people working behind the scenes.
Literally.
To make sure that entire operation ran smoothly.
And of course, we can't forget the crucial role of the Canadian forces.
Right. We talked about their efforts in the Battle of the Atlantic, but they were just as important in Sicily.
Oh, absolutely. The Canadians played a vital role.
Those troops, battle-hardened from earlier campaigns,
They were instrumental in capturing key towns.
including the strategically important city of Catania.
They faced fierce resistance from the Germans, but their courage and determination were key to the Allied victory.
It's amazing to see how those experiences, even setbacks like Dieppe, made those Canadian troops so effective.
They were constantly learning, adapting, and becoming a formidable force on the battlefield.
Each campaign, each battle, honed their skills.
Forged a sense of determination.
That would be so valuable in the challenges to come.
The Canadians were proving themselves to be a crucial part of the Allied war effort.
So after weeks of intense fighting, the Allies captured Sicily.
Right.
What was the immediate impact? How did it affect the war in Europe?
Well, the fall of Sicily was huge for Italy politically.
How so?
It led directly to the downfall of Benito Mussolini.
The fascist dictator who'd ruled Italy for over 20 years.
Facing pressure from his own government and losing public support, he was ousted in a dramatic coup.
It's incredible how one military campaign can have such a huge political impact,
The capture of Sicily essentially took out the Italian leadership.
paving the way for a shift in power in the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
And with Mussolini out of the picture.
Italy's new government wasted no time in negotiating a separate peace with the Allies.
So just weeks after Sicily fell, Italy surrendered.
Withdrawing from the Axis alliance in September 1943.
That's amazing. The Allied gamble had really paid off.
In a big way.
They secured a strategic island, knocked a major Axis power out of the war.
A huge morale boost for the Allies.
And a big setback for Hitler.
Absolutely. It was a turning point in the war.
The momentum was shifting towards the Allies.
They freed up their resources.
And opened up new possibilities to strike at German-controlled territory in Europe.
For sure.
But even with Italy out, the fight wasn't over.
No, the Germans weren't giving up easily.
Did the Allies invade mainland Italy next?
Mm.
Or shift their focus?
They did move to capitalize on their gains in Italy, landing troops on the mainland soon after the surrender.
Okay.
But the campaign in Italy turned into a long, tough slog.
Ah, I see.
The Germans, even on the defensive, were really good at using the terrain to their advantage
Slowing down the Allied advance.
and inflicting heavy casualties.
So while the Allies were gaining ground, it wasn't that quick victory they'd hoped for.
Not at all.
Did this shift to Italy affect the planning for other operations?
Like the invasion of France.
Yeah.
It definitely had an impact.
How so?
Well, the resources needed in Italy delayed the timeline for Operation Overlords, the D-Day landings in Normandy.
It's fascinating how these campaigns were all intertwined.
Each one influencing the others.
The Allied victory in Sicily may have led to the fall of Mussolini and Italy's surrender, but it also drew resources away from other objectives.
It shows the complex, often unpredictable nature of war,
Decisions in one place can have ripple effects across the globe.
affecting strategies, timelines, and ultimately the course of history itself.
Now let's shift gears a bit.
Sounds good.
Our listener also wanted to know about the strategic bombing campaign against Germany.
That massive, controversial effort happening alongside the ground war.
A relentless air assault aimed at crippling Germany's industries
Disrupting their transportation.
and ultimately breaking the will of the German people.
A campaign that really pushed the limits of technology and warfare.
Thousands of bombers in those daring raids, dropping tons of bombs
Millions of tons.
on German cities and industrial centers.
The scale was unlike anything the world had ever seen before,
And it came at a huge cost.
both in terms of resources and lives lost among Allied air crews and German civilians,
A stark reminder of the devastating consequences of total war.
where the lines blur between military and civilian targets.
And the human cost is just unimaginable.
Absolutely.
But what were the Allies trying to achieve with this bombing?
Was it just about destroying Germany's ability to fight the war, or were there other goals?
Well, there were multiple objectives.
Okay.
On a practical level, they wanted to cripple Germany's war industry,
Stop them from producing weapons.
disrupt their transportation systems,
Okay.
and prevent them from reinforcing their troops on different fronts.
So it was about hitting the heart of their war machine.
Exactly. But there was also a psychological aspect.
Oh, how so?
They believed that relentless bombing would demoralize the population,
Okay.
erode support for the Nazis, and hopefully end the war sooner.
Right.
That's a tactic used in many wars, targeting civilians to break the enemy's will to fight,
But it's always been ethically controversial.
with often unintended consequences.
Exactly. And the bombing of Germany is a perfect example.
In what way?
While it definitely damaged Germany's war effort,
Okay,
whether it actually demoralized the people is debatable.
I see.
Some argue it might have even strengthened their resistance,
Oh, interesting.
rallying them against a common enemy,
The psychology of war is complex.
and often unpredictable.
What one side thinks is a good strategy can backfire.
Absolutely.
And the bombing campaign raises ethical questions
About targeting civilians?
and the long-term impact.
Questions that historians and ethicists are still debating.
It's a reminder that even in a global conflict, we have to consider the ethics.
And the long-term consequences of our actions.
The strategic bombing was a crucial part of the air war over Europe.
But it's a chapter with both triumphs and tragedies.
Successes and failures.
And lingering questions.
But for now, let's shift back to the ground war.
Where the Allies were gearing up for the biggest amphibious invasion in history.
Operation Overlord.
The D-Day landings on the beaches of Normandy.
D-Day, June 6th, 1944.
A date that changed everything.
The beginning of the end for Nazi Germany's hold on Europe.
Years of planning, training, logistics, all leading up to this one massive gamble.
Imagine the tension, the anticipation,
As those Allied troops approached those beaches, crammed into landing craft,
facing a determined enemy.
fighting with everything they had.
D-Day was a clash of titans.
A battle that would push everyone to their limits.
And right there, alongside their American and British allies, were the Canadians.
Once again, ready to prove themselves.
Their courage unwavering.
So let's dive into the heart of D-Day in Part 3.
We'll explore those landings, the sacrifices made, and the eventual triumphs.
The victory that opened the door for the liberation of Europe.
Join us then as we continue to explore this crucial chapter in World War II history. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've covered some serious ground, from those intense battles in the Atlantic to the hard-fought victories in North Africa and Italy.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And through it all, we've seen how those Allied forces, including those brave Canadians, steadily push back against the Axis powers.
And now we're at that pivotal moment, D-Day, June 6th, 1944.
A day that changed everything.
Absolutely, the culmination of years of planning.
This massive gamble that would determine the fate of millions.
It really puts things into perspective.
It does. Over 150,000 Allied troops, thousands of ships and aircraft, all part of this coordinated attack on the beaches of Normandy.
The largest amphibious invasion in history.
A truly bold move to break Hitler's hold on Europe.
Imagine those landing craft approaching the beaches, wave after wave, under intense German fire.
The noise, the smoke, the explosions, it must have been chaotic.
A scene of incredible courage amidst the chaos.
And right there in the thick of it, alongside their American and British comrades, were the Canadians.
Landing on Juno Beach.
Those 14,000 Canadians faced fierce resistance.
The beaches were heavily mined, the cliffs fortified with machine guns and artillery.
They faced heavy casualties, but pushed forward with incredible determination.
Securing their objectives, establishing a vital foothold.
I'm always amazed by the stories of individual heroism from Juno Beach.
Like what?
Soldiers braving that intense fire to clear obstacles.
Right.
Medics risking their own lives to help the wounded.
Ordinary men doing extraordinary things.
It's a testament to the human spirit.
Our ability to overcome fear and adversity in the face of overwhelming odds.
Those Canadians, along with their allies, fought with incredible tenacity.
Their sacrifices paved the way for the liberation of Europe.
And D-Day wasn't just about the sheer scale or the bravery of the troops.
This was also a triumph of planning and logistics.
Absolutely. The coordination required to get that massive force across the English Channel, land them on a heavily defended coastline, it's mind-boggling.
A feat of incredible complexity.
Requiring a level of international cooperation rarely seen before.
It shows that even in a global conflict, the human capacity for collaboration and innovation can prevail.
But that victory at Normandy was just the beginning.
Right. It wasn't a straight shot to victory.
What challenges did the Allies face as they pushed east from Normandy?
Were there any other major battles that stand out? The Allied advance was marked by a series of tough battles.
Oh, like what?
Like the Battle of the Falaise Pocket, where they surrounded and destroyed a large German force.
That must have been a turning point.
And the brutal fighting in the Hutchings Forest, a densely wooded area that became a real killing ground.
It sounds like the liberation of Europe was a long and grueling fight.
It was a war of attrition, a slow, bloody grind that tested everyone's endurance.
But despite the setbacks and casualties, the Allies kept pushing forward.
Driven by their belief in their cause.
And this final push into Germany was a two-front war, wasn't it?
The Soviets were advancing from the east,
putting even more pressure on the Germans.
The Red Army, after those brutal years on the Eastern Front, was a force to be reckoned with.
Their advance was relentless.
Yeah.
It's hard to grasp the scale of this conflict. Millions of soldiers, the distances, the sheer destruction.
It's staggering.
Did any stories or experiences stand out in our research?
One thing that really struck me was the resilience of the soldiers on both sides.
They endured so much harsh winters, scorching summers, constant danger.
The ever-present threat of death.
A testament to human endurance.
Pushing beyond our limits.
And even amidst that brutality, there were glimpses of humanity.
Really?
Soldiers on opposing sides, sharing a moment of camaraderie, recognizing their shared humanity.
That's powerful, a flicker of hope in the darkest of times.
It is. And as the Allies moved deeper into Germany, they started uncovering the full horror of the Nazi regime.
The liberation of the concentration camps exposed the true depths of their cruelty.
A systematic extermination of millions.
It's chilling, a reminder of what was at stake.
The fight against tyranny and oppression, the reason those soldiers fought and endured so much.
The liberation of those camps was a turning point, morally.
It solidified the Allied cause.
Reinforced their determination to defeat Nazi Germany.
And finally, after years of brutal fighting, after countless lives lost, the war in Europe came to an end.
May 7th, 1945, Germany surrendered.
A day of celebration, relief, mourning, and hope.
A mix of emotions, for sure.
But the effects of World War II would continue to shape the world for decades.
The political landscape was forever changed. The Cold War was brewing.
And millions of veterans returned home, carrying those scars of war, physical and emotional.
Their experiences would impact their lives, their families, their communities for generations.
The impact of war extends far beyond the battlefield.
World War II tested humanity, showing our capacity for both great evil and extraordinary courage.
It reshaped the world, leaving a legacy of triumph and tragedy.
Lessons learned and questions that still linger.
As we look back at this pivotal time in history, it's crucial to remember the sacrifices made, the lessons we learned, and the importance of working towards a world without such conflicts.
A world where peace prevails.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the key campaigns of World War II.
It's been a privilege sharing this journey with you.
We hope you gained new insights and a deeper understanding of this complex and transformative period.
Until next time.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.